Okay, the next part will be another panel, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Keith Belk. Dr. Belk we talked about Gary Smith and his role as the Monfort Chair. Keith Belk is the new Monfort Chair, the new-looking Gary Smith, having to fill some pretty big shoes. So delighted to have Keith be the moderator of this panel on food safety and meat safety, and I'll have him introduce our two panelists.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to, before we start with our panel, I'm just going to throw out sort of a few things as food for thought so that perhaps as our speakers complete their tasks and assignments this afternoon, you can begin to think about asking some questions that will challenge them, because I definitely like to see Dr. Ruby challenged. So the first thing I want to bring up is, most of you have been here all day and you've heard all of the talks today. What is the one thing, one element of all of the talks that you've heard today that transcended what the overall topic of the presentation was? It's food safety. Food safety entered the arena on every single topic that we've discussed today, whether it's maintaining access to export markets, or whether it's making sure that that you have a place to distribute products in New York City. It affects everything that we've discussed today. The second thing I'm going to point out to all of you is that from the point of slaughter on in the livestock industry, every company that produces a meat product today, whether it's a fresh meat product or a processed meat product, virtually all of them, large, medium, small-sized, have been forced in the marketplace without regulatory requirements to implement a developing sort of an evolutionary trend in business. They've been forced to implement global food safety initiative standards. Standards that exert process control over both safety and quality in their operations. So that's something that's affecting the industry in a big way, and that costs money, but is being demanded by the folks that buy products from those plants. So Walmart says you must implement global food safety initiative standards if you want to sell products to us, and so everybody does it, right? That's predicated on implementing a process control system that actually goes far beyond regulatory requirements to improve the control of food safety and quality management and production systems. The other thing I'm going to, and again, these are just bullet points for you all to think about. We're in 2016 now. On July 25th of this coming summer, that will be the 20th anniversary of the implementation of the HACCP, Pathogen Reduction HACCP Systems Final Rule, which occurred in July 25th, 1996. So the question perhaps you could be asking yourself is, what has changed? How has the industry evolved? And what sorts of things do you have to look forward to in the future as a consequence of what has happened during that 20-year span of time? And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is that we have a lot of graduate students in our program. Some of them are sitting here this afternoon. Glad to see you all. And we have a lot of undergraduate students in our programs at CSU and at other major universities around the country that are studying animal science and food safety. And the one thing that I can tell you that is common across all of those students and what they're learning and what they hope to achieve in life is that if they're going to remain in this industry in the future, they will need to know something about food safety for the reasons that I've already demonstrated to you. Is it's permeating everything that we do in livestock production and in meat production. And so the point of that being that if you're a student completing or looking towards completing a degree or a graduate degree, I think it's important to think about some of the potential that exists there for you in a career. The demand for food safety creates a demand for people that are technically competent that can help and assist companies as they implement programs to deal with food safety issues. So that's just a few things that I'm going to bring up before we start our panel. We have two great speakers to talk to you this afternoon. The first of these, and by far the classier, is Dr. Mandy Carr-Johnson.
Oh, nice.
Mandy is executive director? No, executive director?
Mm-hmm.
What's the title now?
Yeah, senior executive director.
Senior executive director. She's basically like the vice president in charge of research for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And so she has a really unique perspective on, because she is in charge of managing so much research that happens in all topics related to food safety. She has a really unique position on what the future holds for food safety and for those of you that are developing a career in the livestock industry. And so she's going to talk first about that with you. And then our second speaker is also a close friend, Dr. John Ruby, so JBS is a company that's kind of strange because they don't believe in titles, so nobody has a title, except for maybe Wesley, right? But Dr. Ruby is actually what would be equivalent to the Senior Vice President for Food Safety, well, Technical Services, I guess is the proper term, for JBS Beef North America. So as we listen to them this afternoon, please be thinking of some challenging questions that you can pose to these two as a panel to help facilitate an intriguing afternoon in food safety. Thanks. Dr. Mandy Carr-Johnson.
Yeah, I'll use this one. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, great. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I want to take the opportunity to talk not only about food safety, but a little bit broader as well about some of the challenges and opportunities that, from my perspective, working at NCBA, and I typically work on the beef checkoff side. So NCBA as an organization has basically two parts. One part is the one that is a contractor to every dollar that a beef producer pays into the checkoff every time a beef animal is sold, then that money is appropriated by a committee of producers to different kinds of work. It will either be in promotion, it will be in research, or it will be in what they call industry information. So what I wanted to bring to you today is a little bit more than a research conversation, but what is the environment around the beef industry today from what some may think is a beef safety perspective, but also what may be perceived as a beef safety perspective, maybe by the influencer community, medical doctors, health professionals, those who make decisions, all the way to the consumers themselves. So I want to start with a topic called, a title or a term called factory farming. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard this term, factory farming, and oftentimes it's one that maybe we take offense to. We don't think what we do is factory farming, but a lot of times others outside of the industry with less familiarity think what we do in raising beef today is factory farming. So we look at that and it really becomes what is in each individual's mind. And it's based on a lot of different things. It might be based on an image that they saw in a news article or online, or their friends showed them, or maybe just what they perceive in their mind because they haven't really seen the environment themselves. So a couple of different ones I'll put up here. How many of you saw this article again by CNN? And how many of you know who Tom Colicchio is? Who knows who Tom Colicchio is? Yeah, so Tom Colicchio was a judge on Top Chef. Okay, he has a group of restaurants, many different concepts. One I actually am quite fond of the food of is a Kraft Steakhouse. Love to go to the one when I go to Las Vegas anytime to the NFR, I always go to Kraft Steakhouse. A great eating experience. However, sometimes his views may be a little different than what many of you may have as a view. Do you know who his wife is? Anybody know who his wife is? Her name is Liz Silverbush, and what she is a movie producer. And her passion is about how food is raised, and is it raised in a humane way? Is it an environmentally sound way? And is it in a way that is most close to how it used to be? And that is her perspective. So oftentimes, these influencers, a celebrity chef, their spouse, that influences other people may then influence the opinion of a lot of consumers. Here's another one, factory farming headline that actually came out of Forbes magazine. So you can see that this is a conversation that goes on and influences consumers, especially through social media. When you look at that, you think, is this how everyone thinks? But when you look at consumers and you poll them and you ask them, does the way that animals are raised today strongly or mostly positive, or is it strongly or mostly negative opinions that you have? And you see that for the majority, about 65%, consumers say that the positives in the way that cattle are raised today outweigh the negatives. And that's a good sign, something that we can be proud of. However, when you dig a little deeper and you ask them specifics, there are a lot of perceptions behind that. One of the perceptions when you ask them, okay, they bring up factory farming, you say, what does that mean? Their true understanding of how familiar they are with the production system itself, have they seen it? Have they read about it through factual information? Their familiarity is very low, but they've heard about it and they have concerns about it. So there's always this big gap that gets filled with what? All kinds of things, anything they can find. Okay, so it's one of the things that is a challenge today, and that's not something that's going to go away. Okay, we're going to be faced with filling that gap and bridging the gap for years to come. Often when you have the ability to either take them to a production environment, whether that's cow-calf ranch or to a feedlot or any of the operations in that system, they really find that it's not what they thought. The reality of that it's a very complex system. It may be much more complex than they thought, especially compared to how other animals are raised and produced, but also how other food products are produced. So them understanding the complexity of the industry is one that they often find is different than what they thought. They often don't know that it takes as long as it does for a beef animal to get from birth to a product that they would have in a grocery store or in a restaurant. They don't realize there's as many people involved in the system as there is. Okay? There are hundreds of thousands of individuals making this food item. That's not what they think when they think of the word factory farming. So it's often very different. They don't understand that there are individuals or families behind many of the operations. So it starts to look a little different than they thought it was before they ever had a conversation or an experience. When you talk to them, we do a lot of tours. Okay, that's what we call them, or experiences. So we'll take a group of influencers or consumers to a cow-calf operation, to a stocker background, or to a feedlot, maybe even all the way to a packer. And they see that experience. What we often have is pre- and post-survey information so you can get an idea if you were effective or not. And you'll see a lot of times when you talk about humane treatment, before an experience, when it's just a black hole of information and defining what goes on, they have a lot of concern. They're somewhat or very concerned. You see on humane treatment is 92%. But after seeing how an animal is raised, you can see that that can significantly lower. So my point with this slide is most people have never had an experience of understanding how cattle are raised. So they don't know what is happening, so they fill that void with all kinds of information. The opportunities for all of you is you have had that experience. If you haven't had the experience of all those sectors, make it a priority to get it. Find out how to go take a tour, visit with a producer, go to a feedlot if you haven't. Understand what's going on so that you can actually explain it with real facts. The challenge becomes is when you can't do that and someone then will question and you can't provide them with some experience to help them bridge that gap. In person is always great, not always able to take every consumer, right, to a feedlot or to a cow-calf operation. So there's other ways to do that. There are great tools online, videos, all other kinds of work that you can utilize. We know that from our market research that incorporating all the people is more believable than only talking about one piece at a time, because they know that there are multiple sectors. And if you decide to not talk about the feedlot, they think you're hiding something. If you decide to not talk about the packing plant, they want to know what you're not telling them. So you have to talk about it as a whole system and not hide things, but the right level of transparency, not to scare anybody away. A couple of other things there's opportunities that I've just listed that we know from our market research that you may want to consider as you're becoming an active participant in this industry. I just put a couple of resources up there. Many of you know all the tools that are available online. This is one that was developed. It's called the Dynamic Lifecycle. There's an infographic. Consumers today appreciate infographics because they're very simple. They can all fit into something that you can see a whole cycle on one sheet. But there's also that opportunity to then add the video to it. So the infographic taken to a 4-minute video. Does it show every single step of the process? No, it can't, because you can't maintain everybody's attention span to do that. But there are tools that you can use. If you are in an environment where you have a question, find ways to have a healthy conversation with people so that they can be more informed and make their decision based on information versus the lack of. The other topic that I wanted just to cover, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, is antibiotics. A little bit on use and a little bit on resistance, because it is a topic that is being discussed all the way from when the White House sets up forums and brings people together. That obviously increases people's desire to know about the topic, but also from companies making sourcing decisions based on some information or their perception of how antibiotics are used. So we talked about these individuals of factory farming. Again, I just put up two pieces of news that have influenced the consumers and influencer population. Again, topics like this, from a release from the White House all the way to those related to a news hub putting out information and using video. The challenge with this is it's implied that what they see in one video applies to everything in the production chain. So often influencing perception. Again, when you look at antibiotic use in food production, you ask consumers, are they concerned about it? 82% say yes. When you say, how much have you been exposed to how this works? Have you been in an environment where it's used? Familiarity with the actual situation is very low. So that gap gets filled with all kinds of information. So I put this up here for perspective because I think we often don't know what a consumer thinks about the use of antibiotics, and we assume it means they want none. When actually, when you talk, and we did focus groups as well as large consumer population discussions, when you talk about the use to treat a sick animal, most consumers are very much in favor of antibiotic use to treat a sick animal. They don't want animals to suffer because they are not being treated for a disease or illness that they have. When you look at the next one, to control or prevent illness and disease, a little bit lower, but still relatively high in a desires of a consumer to want that to occur. Where you get to the point where people are more uncomfortable is when you get to the last one, using antibiotics for growth promotion use. Most consumers look at that and say, well, that's not necessary, that's about money. So their view of that is that that would be one that they find a little less acceptable than use for something that is a more humane treatment and for health. So when you know that that's what they're thinking, then you know then that when you see things in media that then take them to a place of wondering, well, if we're using it for those reasons, to the previous speaker's comments, then they make the assumption that the reason we have resistance is because we're doing those things. Even though that it's not a linear relationship. 1 + 1 does not equal 2 in this scenario. There's a lot of things that cause resistance. But they're filling that gap of information with other things like what we saw. So we know that resistance is going to be a challenge for the industry to face in the next 10 years. To better understand what role, if any, in the way that antibiotics are used in raising cattle today, does it play in resistance formation that has any impact on human health? I don't know that we can give anyone the answer today of exactly what that relationship is and how we can change it. That's what we have to better understand, and that's what we currently are working on as an industry to research that, to better understand it, so we can be actively engaged in a conversation with good data. Familiarity with resistance, same story. Sounds bad. They all think it sounds bad. But do they understand it? Not really. Okay? How many of you in here think you could explain resistance? It's tough. Okay? It's tough. But being better informed is something that's going to be critical for you as you engage in the industry. Be better informed. So the previous speaker spoke about what's changing in the way we use antibiotics, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But know that one of our opportunities is to try to better quantify how we use antibiotics, so we're not only using what others put out as the amount of antibiotics used in the livestock industry from sales data. Right now, we don't have any other good information to put that in perspective. So it's a priority of the industry going forward. Oops. I'm going to put all these up here. Again, to my previous slide, what are your opportunities? We know from consumer market research, being able to explain that the industry is working together is effective to a consumer. We've got to do that as an industry, right? We can't say we're doing it and then go off and do what we think is what best suits us. So we have to be able to work together and then be able to talk about it. Be able to work for what's in everyone's best interest through stewardship programs. Make those stronger. Make them more widely accepted. Do the right thing. Be responsible. And then this is the last thing I'll leave you with that will hopefully start us into some conversations in the panel after John speaks is be educated. Okay? As an individual in the industry, be as educated as possible. You may be one that is very in tuned in one section of research that you're working on or in a certain area of the industry that you're working on for your graduate program. That is fantastic. But the challenge I'll give you is after I left college and I taught at a university and now as I've transitioned into different roles at NCBA, the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is to become better educated and more well-rounded. So do things like take training free online, Masters of Beef Advocacy. It's not going to have all the details of antibiotic resistance, but it's going to give you coverage across many topics. Other opportunities is know what resources are available to you. Websites that are based on data. Facts About Beef is another one that we engage with. Be BQA certified. Know what that means. Be actively engaged. And then the other piece I just put up here is wherever your passion is for whatever organizations you want to affiliate with, be educated and understand what they're working on. And if you're a member, be actively enrolled in those. Okay, you can be someone who can make a difference if you will actively engage as a passionate person for the industry. So with that, I'm going to turn it to John, and then we'll go to the panel. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a quick question.
Sure.
On your survey,
Yes.
on the before and after.
Yes.
Those figures, is that feed yard and ranch combined, those figures, or is it one or the other?
So it would be based on, that was a group of 6 different tour experiences. So some of them was cow-calf through feed yard through packer. Others were cow-calf and feed yard. So it's just pre and post
but
across.
What I'm asking is, you didn't have, I kind of have the feeling they might like ranch better than feed yard.
Mm-hmm.
So when they did this tour, they did both the ranch, all the people in this sample did both the ranch
And the feed yard. Yes, they did.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I want to know. Okay.
While we're switching mics here, help me thank Dr. Carr-Johnson.
Thank you. I can take it from there.
Hello. Did anybody else hear Bill tell me that I wasn't classy during the introduction? Yeah. You know, I've never really liked Dr. Belk very much. I think that may be a common theme. Just a quick story before I get going. I was driving with my boys, and I was telling them I was going to be giving this presentation, and they kind of looked at me like, was I the right person for that? And I said, well, maybe. And they said, well, you know, at work all you do is emails and meetings. Aren't you a little rusty on the science? And I guess I never thought about it, but luckily, so I brought my son Bennett with me just for all you guys to make sure that if you stump me on any questions, he can definitely take over for you. So stand up, Bennett, and wave and say hi. So as Dr. Belk alluded to, I work for a company called JBS. I was asked to talk about some opportunities in food safety. And this time last year, I gave a talk, and it was entitled, What Keeps Me Up at Night? And last year, it was, without a doubt, fixing or addressing microbiological contamination in our industry. And as I was preparing, you know, for this presentation, I thought some of that overlaps. Some of it is the same. So what I wanted to do today is I'm going to be talking about revisiting some of the topics that I spoke about last year, of some of the opportunities, because some of them are the same. I do want to look at how that process has changed and how we've seen improvements from that, because I think that although we have opportunities, there are things that happen throughout industry and throughout the year that can show improvements. And then I want to talk about the importance of people's behaviors and their culture. If you've seen me give presentations in the past with regards to behaviors and culture, you'll see some of these slides, but I think it's worth repeating because it is an important topic. So last year I asked the question on the slide. So what's the best intervention for microbial reduction? And there's a lot of things that you can look at. You know, here you have lists of using hot water, oxidizers, low pH, multiple hurdles, more chemicals, less chemicals. So there's a wide array of stuff that you can do to reduce microbes through the system. We changed our system. We went from using hot water as our primary CCP in our program to using peroxyacetic acid, followed by an organic acid, and then followed by a peroxyacetic acid in our spray chills. Initially, when we began to change that, we had some members of our advisory team that didn't think that was a very good idea. However, we did it anyway. Not that we typically go against what our advisory team comments on, but we did change it, and we found some pretty interesting stuff. And I had a pointer here. If you can see here, this is the overall system. So this data may look similar to some of you that are here. This was performed here in Dr. Belk's lab. But what we were able to see is we did see a fairly significant reduction with this new system. And that was a good thing. We saw an okay reduction with our hot water, but we were still having a lot of positives at the end of our process. So we thought, you know, we need to change something. So we changed that system. We started using more of a chemical-based system. And we found that it improved in a variety of areas, as you can see that from the data represents. So ultimately, at the end of the day, did that system make our process better? Well, we like to think so. So this is a graph. If you look at the red line, that was from 2014. If you look at the blue line, that was from 2015. So as you can see, we had a pretty significant reduction when it came to reducing E. coli positives in our plant. So again, have we made improvements? In my opinion, the obvious answer is yes. But I still don't know what the best system is. There are still opportunities out there. So we had a 53% reduction, but at the end of the day, we still had 467 positives. Of course, those positives, we remove from the system, they go to cooking, so they don't become an issue microbiologically from a public health standpoint, but economically, it still costs us a significant amount of money when we have those. So again, you go back to is there an opportunity? Well, there is. And in this presentation, I know that we have a lot of students here. So I wanted to kind of draw out, is there still opportunities, and what can you do about that? Well, so if you have interest in optimizing systems for food safety, well, there's a place for you in the food safety industry system. If you like that kind of work, then there's areas that you still can improve on. There's still ways that we can go out there and reduce microbes throughout that process. Predictive microbiology I talked a little bit about last year, and I put this graph up, and we're still trying to make heads or tails of it. The dots, the red dots, are event days. For those of you who don't know what an event day is a day that you have much more E. coli positives in your trim that goes into ground beef than you typically would see. So you assume that your whole system is somewhat affected, and you have to take a lot of actions with regards to all your product, including boxed beef. So we said, okay, if we take, these are all other aerobic plate count samples, can you draw conclusions from that? I can't see too many conclusions out of this, but I still kept pushing the idea of predictive microbiology. Well, a lot of people said, look, predictive microbiology doesn't work, quit wasting your time, you're dumb. And that may be the case. However, we found some other data. So I got to give credit to John Bellinger and Food Safety Services Laboratories. They helped us do some data, and this was collected in one of our plants down in Texas. And what we did is we wanted to just try to draw in, these are the orange lines are E. coli positives, pay more attention to the blue lines. So we looked at some data to try to predict, say, well, okay, when are we going to get positives in our system? What's a better way than just getting a positive and then reacting to it? So you can begin to see you get to see some relationships with the two types of organisms. But the reason that I point this out is, now I'm not implying that you go out and you throw out data to make your graphs look better, but what I'm implying is that analyzing that data and digging deeper into it and seeing some things that may not be obvious at times, if we remove this data point, then our graph looks like this. And you can begin to see that there may be some relationships with predictive microbiology. And there may be some things that we can take a look at that we haven't thought about in the past. But at the end of the day, is there an opportunity there? Yes, I think that there is. I mean, if you have interest in predictive microbiology, digging in and analyzing the data, then there's a place for you in the animal protein system. It's not always going to work, but we need people that are going to come in and take a look at this data. And is there another way to look at it? Is there something that it's not telling us? And trying a variety of ways that we can make the system work better. So it's a people business. I mentioned we're going to talk a little about cultures and behaviors. And I've shown these slides several times in different presentations and at different talks. And I think that they're interesting. So if you've seen these, I think they're worth seeing them again. But you talk about behaviors. You talk about culture. So when you see a posted sign like this, typically the response that I get every time is that it's okay to go faster. It's okay to set it at about 80 miles an hour. But is that right or is that wrong? And everybody raises their hand and says, yep, I do it. However, it's not acceptable to some people, such as the Nebraska State Patrol. They don't think that that's right. So at the end of the day, it's your cultures, right? My culture is to speed. Let me rephrase that. My culture is that it's okay to speed. That doesn't mean that I always do that, well, except for in Nebraska. My behavior has consequences, though, right? That's not a secret. So the next piece, then, is will people generally change their culture? And this is where the slides changed a little bit for me. Today, I believe no. I believe no. And that's pointed out by the Denver Metro Police of another ticket that I got, which is a few months later after speeding. So again, the consequence of the ticket didn't change whether I thought speeding was okay or not. The consequences will change my behavior. But for the most part, I think a person's culture is set by the time that they get to our industry, whether it's good or bad. So you either really have a strong food safety culture or you don't. And we try very hard to figure out, okay, how do we change people's cultures? How do we do that? How do we get them to have a strong food safety culture? And I don't know that you can. So the other piece of this is going back to behaviors. So How many of you are familiar with the military? How many have been in the military? How many are in the military? Thank you for your service. So I was in the Air Force. I was in the 115 Fighter Wing. I was engine mechanic on the F-16 airplanes. I'm not a militant person. However, why do we have the most effective military in the world? I think for a very simple reason. Because they take groups like this, and in a few weeks, they turn them into this. I don't believe that all these people have the culture of this. But what the military has mastered is the art of influencing behaviors independent of what your culture is. The military doesn't come in and say, I want you to become a militant person. I want you to follow all those rules of the military. The military comes in and says, you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. They're going to immediately change your behaviors. I don't necessarily believe that all these people have a military culture, but they certainly behave in the way that the military wants them to. So we need to focus on teaching and training employees how to behave and not simply trying to change their culture. I know what I want you to do. Now I want you to do it. So at the end of basic training, we're always, the drill instructors would brought us in a room and they said, okay, so you have any questions for us? And they say, inevitably, they ask the question. So why do you make such a big deal about how to fold our socks? Okay, they're socks, right? And it's pretty simple. If they can't get you to fold your socks, then how much confidence are they going to have in you to have you have the ability to keep the airplanes in the sky? Folding socks is easy. Fixing jet engines is not. So you have to be able to know that there's basic things that when you're told what to do, that you're going to do those. So what's the parallel with food safety? Well, it's pretty simple. If we can't get our employees to perform basic tasks like washing their equipment every time, then when we're not there, how are we going to get them to be performing the entire dressing procedure properly? Washing your knife is simple. Washing your hands is simple. Dressing a carcass is not. If you behave the way that is systematically instructed to you, it can be, but you have to do that. We would like to think that a person's culture is going to come in and say, you know what, I'm going to do it perfectly every time. It's not. They're not necessarily going to think that way. They're not necessarily going to think that this is food that somebody's eventually going to eat. They're going to look at it as, here's my job, I'm here for 8 hours, and I'm just going to do path of least resistance. We got to get them to understand that behaviors are the important piece. Now, it's a people business, right? Expect good behaviors. So how strong a person's culture is regarding a topic, for example, food safety, like I mentioned, will influence that behavior. So if you tell them that, hey, this is from a food safety standpoint, this is the most important thing that you can do for your behaviors and what we want you to do. If you believe in a strong food safety culture, it's going to be easy for them to understand. If you don't believe it, it's going to be a little bit harder for them. It's going to be harder for them to understand why. I don't get it. This isn't the way I was raised. This is the way I was growing up. This is the way I teach my family. I don't get it. And at some point, you have to get past that, and you have to say, just do it. You got to do it this way. You got to behave in the right way. You have to find ways to influence behaviors dependent of that person's culture, because you cannot come in and expect that you're going to change those people. But you can come in and expect that they're going to behave in a certain way, the way that you want them to. Over time, the repetitive change in behaviors, you hope that that person will then begin to realize that, hey, this is the right thing to do. This way I'm going to start doing it forever. I'm going to do it when no one's watching. But, hey, don't hold your breath. Don't go into it thinking that, yep, the end result is this person is going to think as strongly about food safety as I am, because they may and they may not. So the opportunity, yes. You know, you can always help develop programs and training and teaching how employees how to behave in a food safety way. If that's something that you have interest in, there's a place for you in the animal food industry. So lastly, pre-harvest. You know, I brought pre-harvest up last year. Pre-harvest has always been a challenge for me. The reason being is I think it's really important. I think pre-harvest food safety is something that is going to continuously be that next step. The challenge is it's this big black box. There's things out there that really don't work very well. There's things out there that may work. It's hard to test it. It's a big environment. Trying to get to a small environment. At the end of the day, we're trying to keep E. coli out of our combos. We don't know when we're going to get positives. It's extremely expensive. We'd like to go to Dr. Belk and say, hey, we want you to figure out what the best system is. And he comes to me and says, I need $50 million. And we say, oh, we don't have that much. And we'll give you $10. And it just doesn't, it's hard to make all that work. So is it an opportunity? Yes. So if you're interested in continually banging your head against the concrete slab until your headache goes away, then there is a place for you in pre-harvest food safety, because at times that's what you're going to feel like you're going to be doing. But at the end of the day, I say that sort of jokingly, but it is a very important opportunity in our business, and we have to continue to look forward and figure out ways how to do that. So in the end, being realistic in food safety, Dr. Belk mentioned it, that it touches a lot of stuff in all aspects of our business, from the live side through slaughter into our consumers. You're going to hit and bounce off of them more times than you go through it. And you have to know that going into it. You have to know that there's not everything that you do is going to work, but you got to keep coming back and seeing if you can figure out what those things are. The success is that it's continuous improvement towards a very aggressive goal. We had, 2014, we had 8 events. 2015, we had none. That was a very aggressive goal, but we went after it and we got it. We reduced our E. coli positives by 50%, but we can go more. We can do better than that. We may not always hit it, but you got to have that stretch goal for something to reach for. Success will only come with a balance between science and people. You have to have the science in order to get done what needs to get done, but you got to have the people to do it too. And you got to make sure that those people are trained and they know what the expectations are so they can behave properly in those areas of the business. This is my shameless plug into, if you're interested in coming to JBS and doing some work for us, there's a few areas that you can do that in. We have a couple training programs, as you can see here, management training program. We also have summer internships or direct hires. If any of those things are interesting to you, you can go to our website, tell us what you're interested in, or you can talk to some of your professors. Dr. Belk, obviously, Dr. Smith, they'll be able to help you get you into the places that you need to get into. So with that, that's all I got. So
help me thank Dr. Ruby and Dr. Carr-Johnson.